We are back. It is Mailbag Monday after a rather frustrating week with CBA last week. We've got all of that and your questions coming up. This is Locked On Brewers.
You are Locked On Brewers, your daily Milwaukee Brewers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in, everybody. I'm Dominic Catronio, along with Vinny Rattino. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. This is Locked On Brewers, and today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. He's a former big leaguer turned broadcaster. I'm a play-by-play broadcaster turned statistician. And here we are talking about your favorite team, the Milwaukee Brewers. It is Mailbag Monday, so we will be getting to your fan-submitted questions here in just a little bit. We also have the ZiPS projections that were released on FanGraphs. We're going to go over some of those with the standings projections, as well as individual performances that are projected by our friend Dan Szymborski with FanGraphs. And then finally, of course, we're going to start off with this. CBA negotiations, which is on the forefront of everybody's mind. But before we do that, Vinny, how was your weekend? Let's start with a smile on our faces, right?
Yeah, no, it was a great weekend as always. Spent time with the family. Didn't really do much other than I really dug in onto your podcast on Friday that you released, kind of detailing and snapshotting really everything that's gone on with the CBA, which I got to tell you, it was awesome, Dom, because there's so much to know, there's so much to read. But you just kind of summed it all up, and I actually found a lot of value in it personally. And I'm sure if you guys are out there are wondering what is going on with this lockout and why certain things are being argued over, why certain topics are being brought up. I mean, Dom just does give a great Cliff Notes version of what's going on and all the information that's out there from Jeff Passan to Evan Drellick to a number of the other journalists out there that have been detailing these pieces and releasing these really detailed pieces. It's a very good resource for everybody to kind of go to if they want some understanding. So if you're a fan, not only of the Brewers, just of baseball, please go listen to that episode. I'm going to re-listen to it, and I'm going to, learn a lot from it. And I have learned a lot from it. So thanks for doing that, Dom.
Well, thanks for listening. I've got some great feedback on it so far this past weekend on it. It was a labor of love, to say the least. I have a longer version in my computer that was closer to 30 minutes long that kind of defeated the purpose of it being short, sweet, and to the point. So rewrote it, chopped a lot down, figured it all out, and I'm glad people enjoyed it. The whole point of it was to make it digestible. I think it accomplished that goal. Just understand that it's deep. There are layers to it. The analogy I use is like you're in the 4-foot end of an Olympic-sized water polo pool. You know, there's a lot more to go off the deep end with here. So that's where I am with that. Thanks for everybody who's listened and the kind words. If you haven't listened yet, it's literally the last podcast. If you're looking for it on YouTube, the reason it's not on YouTube yet is because I'm making a visual companion with it as well to add some stats and add some visuals to make it a little easier to understand as opposed to just a podcast format. And who knows, the news might change so fast that by the time I have that done, we might have a season, which would be great. That would be awesome. So let's pick things up where that episode left off real quick. I had reported, that we talked about Thursday's headlines that the owners had decided to try to bring in a federal mediator into negotiations with the players. And by the time that I had posted that podcast, it was well out there. And then by the end of the day, Friday, the players had rejected that notion from the owners and said, nope, we are waiting at the table. That was the hashtag that they used, at the table. Ready at the table, I believe, is what they used. And then, the weekend was just full of sludge and hot takes back and forth, mostly from the players. And it kind of illustrated my last point really well. This is the first work stoppage in the social media era where we're seeing every moment of negotiations being sludged out. And it feels like it's dark right now and it feels awful. My dad had a great text to me the other day. He's like, it's darkest before the dawn. I'm gonna roll with that for a little bit longer. I don't know about you, Vinny.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be, and you made this point, which I've really taken to heart. There has to be some sort of uncomfortability to this whole thing in order for a deal to get done, right? I mean, neither side's going to budge until the other side feels threatened that there's not going to be a season. So they're going to do that. They are going to take shots back and forth on social media. It might get scary at times that there might not be a season, but like your dad said, like you've said before, like there's got to be some feelings of, oh my goodness, is this actually going to happen where there's not going to be a season? There has to be some sort of feeling like that. It doesn't feel good for us fans, but it's got to happen in order for a deal to get done for both sides. Both sides have to move, right? I think we've talked about that before. Both sides have to move from their positions that they're in now in order to find a deal. That was really profound, Dom. You know, both sides have to kind of negotiate, but they really do, and kind of have to concede some of their positions.
You're absolutely true. The players are not perfect in their negotiations, and while in a large part I think I am on the players' side on this, what they're calling for and what they're hoping for is not perfect. And to be fair, they have made quite a few concessions already. So the biggest thing that I want people to take away from Friday's episode was that this is not millionaires versus billionaires. This truly is not. What the millionaires that you think are fighting for the guys that are making league minimum. The guys that are, as I put it in the episode, more than half of the league is making less than $1 million. And I want to give one more hypothetical here that this wasn't in the episode. So let's say Corbin Burnes did this in a regular 2020 season. Let's say 2020 is totally in a vacuum. Let's say 2020 happens and it's a full season, and Corbin Burnes is the Cy Young of 2020. Okay? It was his second year before he was finally eligible for arbitration. That meaning, now, not saying the Brewers owners would do this, the Brewers owners are allowed to pay him league minimum the following year after the Cy Young. Okay? Think about that sentence for a second. The owners are allowed to set your salary at whatever they want. Now, to be fair, a lot of owners still give bonuses and still give raises to the $1 million figures after incredible seasons. But there is no reason for them to do it. And in fact, this is what that pre-arbitration pool is trying to help a guy like Corbin Burnes, who wins a Cy Young before he's eligible for arbitration. And, in his case, or any young stud's case, you never turn down your first fortune. And to be able to get a little bit of a pool, a little bit of assistance to make more than league minimum, get closer to that $1 million number, that's what this is all about with this pre-arbitration pool. That's where the players are certainly dug in about getting that player arbitration pool, the pre-pool available to them. And a big thing that I look back on, and the number one number that my jaw was wide open when I read it, is about the median salary, not the average salary, but the median salary, that it's dropped $500,000 in just 6 years. That's insane to me that the median, the guy right in the middle, it's dropped $500,000. Even while guys, are making $300 million, the Harpers and the Machados and the Tatis and the Seagers, these numbers are still going out, but it's still falling. That's what the players are fighting for. Why isn't the bottom rising with the cream of the crop?
So I'm just going to play devil's advocate here and say that because the data, the analytics, the metrics have identified some things about certain players, they are more valuable than, say, a guy that's just got like a half of a WAR, right? Or you would say 0.5 WAR, and is eligible to make the $5 to $10 million. You see this a lot with first baseman. I don't know if you remember, Chris Carter led the league in home runs and then didn't get a job that next year.
Dude, he was in Oakland A for a long time. I know.
Right, and so he didn't get a job the next year. I think he went to Japan or Korea or something the year after hitting 47 bombs. And something like that. I just made up that number. It was a lot of homers. And I think the idea is that, the data and analytics have identified some certain traits about players. So that will make them more valuable, or as valuable as some guys that are making a lot more money. Now, do you blame the teams and the ownership groups for going after guys like that and not tying up dollars? No, you don't, right? But I think what the players are saying is, okay, let's problem solve here. Because you've identified certain things that make other players more valuable, then go ahead and pay them. And so I think even though they're young yet, even though they're pre-arb players, and I love the fact that the owners are actually open, and you mentioned this on your episode, the owners are actually open to paying those guys. They're actually starting a conversation about having a bonus pool for pre-arb players. So I do think that this is a step in the right direction. Now they got to get to a number that's closer to each other. Maybe just meet in the middle. I don't know. But I think that is very, very encouraging.
I agree as well. And to finish your thought on Chris Carter, he hit 41 bombs in 2016, and then basically nobody wanted him with the Yankees in 2017. He ended up going to Mexico for 2 seasons, and he played in Mexico this past year as well. But in 2019, he led the Mexican League with 49 home runs.
Wow.
With Monclova. So there you go. There's your update on Chris Carter for 2022. I don't want to bog this down with a bunch of CBA talk, but this was again, thanks for listening to everybody who's listened. It's a lot. It's going to change, and this week's going to kind of suck. And the reason why is because it's the owners' meetings this week. There isn't going to be much negotiating this week, not until probably later in the week. So I wouldn't expect a lot to change, which sucks given now you're starting to get closer to that hypothetical under the gun. But as I've said long ago, and I said this, I'm on Matt Pauly's podcast this week, and Matt Pauly invited me on, and we talked about it. I said, look, I said this on Friday as well. I'm fine if we're mad and arguing the first week of February. But if we're at this point, at the end of February, I will be sweating. Yes, that's when I will actually be getting nervous. But we're not there yet. So I don't think anything's going to change. If you're not sure what we're talking about, go ahead and listen to Friday's episode. It's a quick 15 minutes, and that's including the ads, okay? So I know how y'all are on the ads, okay? I'm the same way on my podcast, okay? But anyway, we do have some questions. We've got some numbers to talk about here, Vinny. Before we do that, we got to thank our friends with Built Bar. This time of year, well, a lot of folks give up on their New Year's resolutions, of course. Here we are. We're in the first week of February. The big game coming up next weekend as well. You got the wings and the pizza and everything. But, hey, Built Bar is going to actually be a great part of your rotation because you actually enjoy eating it, and they're healthy for you. They're good for you. You can also make sure you try the Puffs. It is still a little chilly right now. The Puffs are fantastic. They're one of the best products that Built Bar has to offer. It's a protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowy. They're even not just a protein bar. They're a treat, and they're still covered in 100% real chocolate, just like the bars are as well. Low calories, high protein. You can replace your candy bars with these, the bars, or the Puffs. They are better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories, whereas Built Bar, 130 calories. And they've got 17 grams of protein and only 4 grams of sugar. As always, you can go to Built.com and use our promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order at Built.com. You can see their entire selection there as well. Again, that's Built.com, BUILT, LOCKED15 for your promo code at Built.com. Also, this podcast is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, now it's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you could ever need. Why would you endure the pointless or, the intimidating questions? Like, I went to a chain store recently and just needed to get a new headlight, and he was like, well, what is it? What's that? I just need a headlight. Why are you making this so complicated, man? You can save time. You can save money with Rock Auto. You can even choose to save 30, 50, 100% more is what you'd be spending at a chain store, whereas Rock Auto has got a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years with their prices reliably low for every single customer. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and to see all the parts available for your car or truck. And if you write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so let them know that Dom and Vinny sent you, that they know that we're the one that took you to Rock Auto. An amazing selection and reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Rock Auto. So ZiPS projections here, Vinny. For those who don't know, FanGraphs, and if you've never read FanGraphs, start. It's the best baseball website, period, end of story. They're one of their great analysts and writers, Dan Szymborski, a really funny follow on Twitter, by the way. He has the ZiPS standings, which is projections based on his formula. I'm not going to get into nitty-gritty. He has a whole explainer of how ZiPS works. Just projecting, and they're fairly good, fairly bad sometimes, and we're fun to laugh at. But, hey, it gives us something to talk about the first week of February. So the Brewers and the standings have come out. Let's just start with first and foremost that the NL Central, he projects that the St. Louis Cardinals will win the Central by 1 game. 89-73 record for the Cards, 88-74 for the Milwaukee Brewers. Now, if all things are considered, I think that's pretty accurate. I don't know about you because, look, the Cardinals in the second half of last season, yes, the walk-off grand slam happened and everything, but they were a very, very different team. And to underestimate St. Louis this year would be a grave, grave mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just don't see them beating the Brewers in the Central, and this is why, because I think the Brewers pitching staff, and as long as you have Josh Hader, as long as you have Devin Williams, they'll find a couple other guys in the back end of their bullpen. The game is so short for the Brewers, especially when you have 3 absolute elite studs at the top of your rotation. The Brewers will never be in a losing streak. I mean, I say that never, but like they're very low risk to ever have more than a 3-game losing streak just because of the arms that they're throwing out there. And then as long as they continue to swing the bats like they did after they acquired Willy Adames, they're going to score enough runs to win easily 90 games, in my opinion. The Cardinals, I just don't see that from their pitching staff. Yes, their offense is very formidable. Yes, they're very high powered. They had 3 guys right in the middle of their lineup hit 30-plus home runs. Tyler O'Neill is turning into a superstar. Obviously Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, Dylan Carlson is up and coming. I just don't see the Cardinals ever not going into some bad stretches because of their pitching staff, and they just don't have reliable arms in their pitching staff. So that's where I see the difference in these teams. I do think the Brewers are, I would say, a tier ahead of the Cardinals. Yes, I know that the Cardinals had a 17-game winning streak last year and came on like gangbusters. I just see the Brewers as a good tier ahead of the Cardinals, and I'm not just saying that as a fan. I'm saying that pretty objectively.
I agree with you there. I think the ZiPS projections really like the offense from the Cardinals, as you laid out. And look, I mean, you can talk about, this is what I joke with people who say defense wins championships in football. Well, what happens when the defense is suddenly down 14-0? You're going to rely on that defense to win the game?
That's true.
I mean, that's my point. Like, I get it. This is an amazing pitching staff, and they have earned every accolade they have. But the moment that, as we just found out in the playoffs, the moment that the pitching fails, and if your offense is your weakness, how are you winning games? Look at the playoffs last year. So that's where I worry, is that they're not going to be slugfest by any means. But how many times do we see, and especially obviously in the NLDS, where it was like 2-0 felt like 5-0 sometimes last season? Woodruff especially, he would pitch his tail off for 6 innings, but for some reason he'd exit and be like 2-1. And they'd be trailing. It's just, that's the frustration I think that they run into.
It's a point well taken. So I think really good teams with really good chemistry. Here's the other thing that ZiPS doesn't take into account, and neither does Pacoda or any of these projections. The really good teams with really good team chemistry that Craig Counsell has these guys playing with, you'll win a lot of close games. That's just what it is. I mean, you see, did they lead the league last year and come from behind wins? If not, they were in the top 3.
Third in the National League.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's, and again, you're not going to find any metric or any data that says team chemistry is worth this many runs. You're not, but it just happens just because, really good teams with really good chemistry win a lot of close games. So I think that's what's going to happen again next year.
And then also, don't forget Ali Marmol, their new manager, first-year manager, only 35 years old. So that's something to keep in mind.
True.
As well. But they also, ZiPS, to wrap up the ZiPS point, they also project things on the individual side. And one thing I found very, very surprising, can you guess who is projected on ZiPS to have the highest WAR among position players on the Brewers?
I'm going to say Luis Urias.
That was the answer. So
that was a total guess. Yeah.
3.0 projected WAR, and that leads position players. They project Yelly at a 2.9, Adames at a 2.9, and Wong at a 2.6. But the pitchers obviously take the cake. Burns, Woodruff, and Peralta are projected to be the leaders in WAR for next season. And then Aaron Ashby's projected at 2.2, and even Josh Hader as a closer is figured to be worth 2 wins by himself. I think that's pretty accurate. They're pretty low on Rowdy Tellez, though, at 1.2 WAR if he is the everyday first baseman. I just found that very interesting. The ZiPS is very, very intrigued and very excited to see Luis Urias for another season.
That is very interesting. They're probably taking some of the numbers with walk to strikeout ratio. They're probably taking into account some of his AAA numbers, is my guess, from 2019, 2018. And his age, obviously. He's a very young player, and these players really kind of take another step with their numbers as they get into age 25, 26, 27, especially if they've had a couple of years under their belt already in the big leagues. So you really do see these players kind of take off if they are that young to start their careers in the major leagues. So I can see that. What they don't take into account, like, is the Rowdy Tellez real. Here's my subjective side coming in and my scouting side coming in that really kind of throws the numbers out the window sometimes, is that Rowdy Tellez is a player that really made a big adjustment in my opinion. They told him to get more aggressive within the zone, and that allowed him to really start hitting the baseball all over the field, over the fence, and really take off last year. So I can see that kind of happening and him taking another step because of that. So that's very interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing how these numbers all play out, because there is some accuracy to what they're doing as well, right? I mean, obviously there is, right? So they're counting cards. They're using all the data, all the analytics, all the stats over the history of the game and kind of making these projections. So there is accuracy to what they say. So you have to take it into account.
I agree. And it's just fun to talk about here in the first week of February and then who knows, maybe in September we can turn back and laugh and say, ha ha, it's a very exciting and labor of love for Dan Szymborski, and I just enjoy reading him. So I think it's a great site and a great thing to look at. So shout out to Dan. Also, shout out to it being Super Week, and it's Super Week brought to you by Get Upside, and there's no better place to get all the coverage for the big game than the Locked On NFL podcast, of course, here with our friends with the Locked On Bengals and Locked On Rams. They are in LA all week covering the big game. So it's going to be a whole lot of fun. And, of course, we are brought to you by BetOnline. They've got you covered this season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. Football marching through the playoffs. Here we are at the big game. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, and live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait. Take advantage of all their amazing offers for the 2022 season. BetOnline is where the game starts. I tell you what, if BetOnline had curling options, I might be in trouble. I've been locked in on the curling, man. I don't know about you. I've been loving the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite sports in general. Sport, obviously, one of my favorite Olympic events too. So, yeah, I actually haven't gotten into the Winter Olympics a ton yet. I think I'll watch a little bit after we record here tonight.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, so let's get to these questions here. It is Mailbag Monday, after all. Just a couple of questions real quick from our friends. Thanks so much for listening. Again, you can always follow us at Locked On Brewers on Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts as well. Question on improving the offense. Basically, look, the team it's their big Achilles heel right now. How confident are you guys that we will see an improvement on offense next season based on the moves they've already made? And do you think there'll be any more moves to bolster the offense? This question comes from Ian. Well, I'm going to start with the no more moves camp, in that let's just look at this roster real quick. You are going to get more games from Colton Wong. He missed 46 games last year due to injury. More games of Christian Yelich, and hopefully a better Christian Yelich. He missed 45 games. And you're going to get roughly 50 more games with Willy Adames. Remember, he was hurt for a week and a half or so, and you're going to have him for an entire season now, playing shortstop every day. That's certainly worth something in itself. And another thing I'm looking at, not only do you now have Hunter Renfro playing corner outfield, who's a power hitter, you've also got Tyrone Taylor as your fourth outfielder now, as opposed to Jackie Bradley Jr. So there immediately is some natural improvement from last year over year, assuming health, of course, which you can never assume. But just as it stands now, it should be naturally better. As far as acquiring talent, A, I don't know if you can afford any of it, and B, I don't know if it makes sense, really, because there's no room right now on this team for offense.
Yeah, I would. I've said this from the start. I wouldn't make many moves. I was surprised actually that they acquired Hunter Renfro, which is a great move. I'm glad that they did because they had a hole out there in right field. Some could argue that that was Tyrone Taylor's position to kind of give him an opportunity to play every day, but I like the Hunter Renfro move just because it does replace the runs that Avi Garcia was able to produce last year. I think he's going to do it a little bit more consistently, and I know Avi Garcia was very, very consistent last year. I do think that at times, and again, subjectively speaking, Avi Garcia was an out if a pitcher executed 3 sliders in a row against him. So he was a total mistake hitter at times. So I do think Renfro is going to give you a more, I guess, quality at bat per se, whereas he's not a total mistake hitter. And so I do like, I think that's going to be an upgrade from Avi Garcia, believe it or not. So I do think that that's an upgrade. I agree with you on everything you just said. That's a great point about Willy Adames. You're going to have a full season of Willy Adames. I think Luis Arias, you're really going to have a full season of him as well, right? Because last year I think you really couldn't count on him in the first 40 at bats that I think he was like 2 for 40 or something.
Really slow start.
Really slow start. So you'll have him in April right from the get-go, kind of hit the production that he's been able to put forth for the remainder of the season after those first 40 at-bats. So Pedro Severino, the backup catcher, we'll see what he brings because Manny Pena was a very productive backup catcher as well. So we'll see there. But other than that, I don't see that they need to make any upgrades. I'm with you. There's really not any room for upgrades on their 40-man roster. I think it's pretty jam-packed and full unless you see some kind of blockbuster deal or something like that, which I'd never put past David Stearns, Matt Arnold and company, right? Because they're always up to something, you think. So I think they're set.
The big blockbuster that I'd be looking for is Matt Olson. It makes too much sense. Left-handed power bat, can hit both sides, doesn't strike out a million times, perennial MVP candidate, Gold Glove defense. If you can get him for the right price, go for it. I mean, I'm also spoiled. I've been watching him the last 3 years. So pretty darn good player. It's going to cost a lot, obviously, but that's the only spot I could see where it makes sense to go for it, unless you're getting Matt Chapman over at third. But even then, you might be getting damaged goods. He hasn't really been the same since his hip surgery. But it's an interesting thought exercise because you're not getting Freddie Freeman. You're not going to get Kyle Schwarber probably, unless something crazy happens with a checkbook. But yeah, I think you're gonna let it roll and then see what you need come July. If you need more offense, you're gonna go for it and go get some more offense.
And I'll just say this real quick. I do think that that's kind of the approach probably that Stearns and company is going to take. Like, these are our chips to come to the table, and then they make adjustments on the fly better than any other group in the major leagues. They make phenomenal in-season moves year in and year out since they've been at the helm.
All right, our last question here on Mailbag Monday. This one is coming from Andy. In both your individual opinions, what statistic is closest aligned with improvement? I think you mean like year over year here, Andy, or what you would be looking at for a guy to be maybe even during a season to be improving on. The things that I look at as far as if I'm looking for something to tell me if he's improving or not, I'm looking at things like batting average on balls in play. I'm looking at walk rate. And then if I'm looking at the advanced stuff, I'm looking at his spray chart, not necessarily at exit velocity, but I'm taking a look at his batting average by spray zone, especially if it's a guy getting shifted against. Is it because he's suddenly just hitting little pokes through against the shift, or is he actually driving the ball to the gaps? Those are the things that I'm looking for offensively. On the pitching side of things, my favorite stat in all of pitching is the simplest one. It's first pitch strikes. Is a guy getting a first pitch strike? Yes or no? Because that means he has command. That means the pitch he wants to throw, whether it's a swing and miss or not, I don't care. Is he getting first pitch strikes? That's the first thing I look at for pitchers.
I took this question to mean like, what are the number? And I think you're probably more accurate in what the question was probably. So I took this question a little bit differently. It's probably not what the intention was. What stat are you looking at for a player who you think can take a step? I took the question that way. Yeah. So I think what you're looking at is very simple stuff, and what scouts have been looking at forever is what their strikeout percentage is, what their walk percentage is, And then are they doing damage, on the balls they are putting in play? So those are the stats that I would look at, real simple. And then on the pitching side, again, real simple, walks, strikeouts, and I mean that's it. I mean, obviously I'm looking at velocity too for pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
I think if a guy's throwing hard, and he can somewhat find the strike zone, I think those are the guys that you want to look at to take steps. Like Adrian Hauser is a perfect example. They made some tweaks to him, and all of a sudden he's a mid-rotation starter in the major league. So before, there was some question whether or not he would be a starter at all. Questions about him being a bullpen guy. So those are the things that I would look at in determining whether or not a guy is going to take a step. So
and the one I didn't mention, I also didn't mention swinging strike rate as well as something that I look at all the time for a pitcher. If you got to get a swing and miss, boom, you've neutralized your opponent because he's done all he can do and he couldn't touch your stuff. I think that's really important. Right. And I think a big point too is we named rate stats mostly, that these are rate stats, not counting stats. Not about a guy hitting more home runs doesn't necessarily mean improvement. Now, naturally you would think, oh, a guy hit 30 home runs, he's got to be better. But what's better? It's the classic is a guy with, an 820 OPS and 22 bombs better or worse than a guy with a 725 OPS but 35 bombs. That's your own question. There's a lot of different ways to judge players, and it's just a fascinating world that we live in. One guy says tomato, one guy says tomato, and one guy says he's worth worth 7 figures. The other guy thinks he's worth 9 figures. It's the world we live in. We don't know.
Right. No, I could talk about this stuff all day long. I absolutely love diving into the numbers. I love diving into the scouting side and trying to blend the two. And I think that's what the really good team, I'm going on a tangent here, but I think that's what the really good teams are doing, like the Brewers, is they're blending the two and marrying the two, the scouting and the data and the analytics.
I love it. That's fantastic. That's it for this week's episode. But before we go, I just want to take a moment here on this Monday. We lost a friend a year ago today, and someone who was really, really close to me and really close to the entire baseball community. Pedro Gomez passed away a year ago from today. I knew Pedro really, really well. He was one of the people I first looked up to in this industry. We lived 25 minutes apart from each other in Phoenix. I played baseball against his son. I broadcasted his son, Rio, while he was a student in high school and while he went to U of A. It stinks to not have Pedro here because also I know he would be ripping into the owners and trying to get to the bottom of these stories with the lockout right now. He just always had a smile on his face. And I'll tell a quick story about Pedro is that when I first started broadcasting, when I was 17 years old, not knowing what the heck I was doing, I would do my high school games. And this one spot in particular, there's one school that we were at. I had like a little elevated bench area that I was away from the fans, but obviously I'm not in a booth, so everybody can hear what I'm saying. And I look down below me, and there's a guy like, man, is that Pedro Gomez? Oh my gosh, is that Pedro Gomez? And I didn't know. I just keep calling the game. I'm 17 years old, just trying to figure it out. Game ends. Pedro comes straight up to me, and he's like, "You sound incredible. That was amazing. I where are you? Let me take your card. Like, I got to get this to my bosses at ESPN." And if you don't know already, my dad's a broadcaster too, and my dad's worked with the Oakland A's and worked directly with Pedro, so he knows my dad. And I go, Pedro, my dad, you just haven't met me. My name's Dominic Cotroneo. My dad Vince, and he just lit up. But my point of telling the story is this: Pedro was offering help before he realized I was already in a way in the industry. That's the kind of guy he was. I miss Pedro every day. I miss his family. It stinks, obviously, to think that he's gone, but there are some great ways that you can help. There is the Pedro Gomez Foundation that benefits my alma mater, Arizona State, and the Cronkite School, and the NAHJ, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. If you're so inclined, we don't ask for much, but if his story moves you, a Cuban immigrant from parents from Cuba, it's an amazing story. Go take a click, tell your friends. We miss Pedro dearly, and I just wanted to close our episode with that.
No, it's a touching story. I never knew Pedro, but everything that I've heard about him, it's kind of ringing true with that story right there. So, yeah, it's really, really tragic and sad.
And he's got a great book was made by Steve Ketman of a collection of essays talking about Pedro Gomez. It's fantastic. Get it wherever books are sold. It's called Remember Who You Are. It was his motto. There's great, amazing baseball stories in here. Just listing some of the names on here that tell stories. Dusty Baker, Buster Olney, Scott Boras, Sandy Alderson, Tony La Russa, looking down, Bud Black. You've got Michael Zagueros, legendary photographer with the A's, Bob Melvin, Jeremy Schaap, El Duque. Like, everybody wrote something for Pedro in here. So I would encourage folks to read that. Check out the Pedro Gomez Foundation if you were so inclined. But yeah, that's this Mailbag Monday. On a happier note, we've got a really fun interview coming tomorrow. Sal Frelick is joining us tomorrow for our Interrogation Tuesday. Can't wait for the Boston boy to hop on. He was a whole lot of fun. And then our Throwback Thursday series continues on Thursday. We learned a lot about Sal, don't we, tomorrow? It's going to be a lot of fun to listen to that.
He has a great interview. Make sure you guys tune in.
Awesome. He's Vinny. I'm Dom. Thanks so much for listening on this Mailbag Monday. Back tomorrow with Sal Frelick. Until then, keep on swinging.
You are Locked On Brewers, your daily Milwaukee Brewers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.